Remember me. Remember me. Remember me when cry of coyote echoes over hills and beyond, filling the heart with wonder. The great alone.
The great alone.
Remember me. I think I shall find your spirit walking near the old Bear Creek schoolhouse on the Arthur Place. Memories only remain.
Remember me when snow peaks of Crazy Mountain are silhouettes against the sky.
Remember me when cry of coyote echoes over hills and beyond, filling the heart with wonder.
On the Arthur Place. Memories only remain.
Remember me.
Welcome to Art Talk. I'm Patricia Shippee, your host of Through the Eyes of the Artist. Our guest artist today is Joy Wulke, whose innovative and complex work deals with translucency and light, and their power to create spaces of meaning, memory, and emotion. Joy is a graduate of Washington State University with a Bachelor of Art in Architecture and a Master's of Environmental Design from Yale. She has taught at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland, at Yale, and Montana State University, among others. She has exhibited her work in solo and group exhibitions in galleries and museums throughout the United States. Her awards and commissions are numerous, with many of her sculptures and light installations being enjoyed in public and private collections from Connecticut to California. Her collaborative work includes a recent stage set for Forad's Fizzles at La Mama Theater in New York, and a recent installation at the Stanford Museum. She also recently won a national competition for a Percent for the Arts project for Norwalk Community Technical College. Welcome to Art Talk, Joy.
Thank you, Patricia.
We just saw a little clip of a film called Breathless. Tell us about that and where it was done and why it was done.
Breathless was an installation in the spring of 1992 at Central Connecticut State University. The space at Central Connecticut was conducive for this installation in that it had high ceilings and a large space. And this installation is really the story of my relationship with one particular building in Montana, which I discovered when I started teaching there in 1981. Mm-hmm. And through friends in Connecticut and New York, I met a family who owns a 36,000-acre working cattle ranch. And this 36,000-acre ranch is a conglomeration of smaller ranches throughout pioneering time that has now for 3 generations been a very successful ranch. And on this property are many buildings that have been inhabited through the last 100 years, actually, and that have had different functions. There are barns, houses, and this particular building is a schoolhouse. And when I saw this schoolhouse out on the landscape, there was something that spoke to me about this building. And so I have actually created a relationship with this building. I consider it an ancestor. Mm-hmm. And as I walked into that building for the first time, I could almost hear the children. I could feel the spirit of the people who had built it, the great hopes that they had as they were settling on the land. And all of these emotions as related to what we build are very important to me and really are reasons why I moved from architecture into sculpture, so that I could present a more ethereal work, if you will, mm-hmm. than practical pieces of architecture. But it's interesting that my friends who are architects feel the same way about the buildings that they build. They know that their spirit is going to be attached to that building. And so to be able to talk about that in a sculptural manner opens up all kinds of stories that people have felt in years past about spaces that they've inhabited mm-hmm. and worked with.
And then, but the glass part, I mean, how did that come in? Were you inspired by the building to start working with glass? How did that all come together?
Through the years of observing this building and as it's degenerating, the light patterns have become more complex as the building is going back to nature, and the only bits of reflective quality in the building were the tiny bits of broken glass in the windows. Ah. So for me, that's where the spirits of the people who lived and worked in that building would escape and reflecting and moving on.
That's very interesting, Joy. Let's take our audience with us now to see some glass in your studio. So we're going to do that now and come on back. That's fascinating, Joy. In addition to glass and light and all its reflections, we saw a lot of other elements there. Bones, metal rods, and even water. How do you decide on the materials you're going to use as you begin a project?
The materials really are the message in my work, and they're all representational of psychological aspects of our own selves that we all contain. For me, the bones are artifacts, they're relics, they represent the idea of life, really, and the cycle of life. They remind you of a life that once was, and possibly a life in the future. And with their presence in the artwork, it brings that work, to me anyway, into an animistic point and character, so that the works, I want them to feel alive and be invitational to the viewer, so that the viewer can then become part of the works themselves. The water is a natural addition to the glass work, because glass is a super cool liquid.
Yes.
It's viscous, and as we see in old windows, the wonderful patterning of the glass is really a result of that glass being heated through sunlight over many years and then slipping down and making almost patterns as though it were water, which in fact it is related to.
That's right. Well, how did you get started? I didn't even ask you, how did you get started working with glass?
The glass came from the windows in the Montana building, and then when I moved back to Connecticut, I continued to work with window imagery, which is a very common image for many artists, windows of the soul, the mind.
Yeah.
And I worked with the idea of windows as the positive aspect for us all, where you are escaping into a larger world for yourself. And so the broken window to me was a fanciful image and not one that would be threatening.
Okay,
And then,
well, is that the symbolism of the shattered glass that you use? Like, we have shattered glass in many of the pieces.
that is where it started, and then as time progressed, the shattered glass represented pieces of a whole in the way that the bones represent piece of a whole life, and also that the shattered glass can be contained by itself. It's an architectural material that has the unique quality of being able to be contained in destruction by a structured element or shape of itself. And that also the broken glass captures light beautifully. It almost feels jewel-like. So you are in fact drawn to it aesthetically, but it repels you psychologically because of all of the aspects of the dangers of broken glass. Mm-hmm. And to me that is very important in my work, the attraction, repulsion quality
aspect,
and the beauty and danger aspect. Yeah. And to me the works tell stories. They're almost like fairy tales with the goblins hiding behind
so
the
much
initial
of your
attraction.
Work is story. It's a lot of stories. We're going to talk about stories in a minute, but first let's go look at another collaborative piece, a part of a film you did called City of a New Language, and then we'll come back and talk about it. City of a New Language. Tell me about it and the collaborative aspect of it.
City of New Language is about translucency and light and appearance and disappearance, both of space and people within space, and thoughts and memories. And the material used in this is polarized filter material, which is from Polaroid Corporation, where I received a materials grant, and they sent me the materials. And I initially did this installation at the Connecticut Commission on the Arts for an exhibition. And it seemed quite static. Even though it was interesting walking around the space, I thought, well, it would be much more interesting to have people interact with the material. And it's a new material in terms of using it spatially, so it was difficult to really have the viewers feel free to move. So I reinstalled the work in a studio space and invited friends who were dancers, Fred Zimmerman and Jennifer Botwick, to produce a piece of work that related to the space.
And who did the filming?
The filming was filmed by Philip Simon, who does a lot of filming of performance pieces in the New Haven area. And as he was filming the work, he asked if he could do the music over. And I said, sure, why not? I didn't have any ideas, particularly myself, that I was happy with. And he is a brilliant saxophone player, as well as being able to mix his saxophone work with computerized sound. And I was so excited by his ability to really see the work and also participate with the music that we looked for other opportunities to do collaborative work. The film that you just saw, Breathless, Philip had a large part in that. He did the computerized images, which were images of bones from the building that I spoke about in Montana, as well as photographs that I myself had taken of that building. And he then scanned those images into a computer and made new images from them that are very intriguing, I think. And he as well did the sound for that piece.
Fabulous. It really is fabulous, Joy. You touched on space. We have to take a short public service announcement break, and let's come back and talk about space.
art is a process that fills our lives. See it, enjoy it. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Griffis Arts Center, New London, Connecticut.
Welcome back to Art Talk. Joy Wulke and I are talking about all sorts of subjects in addition to glass and light and translucency and nature. What about space? You taught children. How did space come in?
When I was a graduate student at Yale, I spent most of my time working with children with potential learning disabilities. These were very young children who needed really a head start, and how we felt in our program was that if we could give these children spatial experiences, in other words, climbing equipment, all kinds of changes of height and color and light within the school space, that they would then become better prepared to do their academic work, which in fact became true. Having confidence with your body, you then learn to have confidence with your mind. And I really thought of space as a volume, space as all kinds of wonderful opportunities to fill, not just walls, ceilings, and floors. And that year, many years ago, I went to an exhibition at a museum in New York, and the subject was Ma, which is a Japanese term for space. And it was intriguing to me to see the similarities in the term Ma as compared to how I was filling the space for children.
For children, yeah.
And you see Ma when you see sand gardens, tea houses, and various kinds of gardening places in Japan, where the space and the nature of the space really is where you are, and you are moving through that as though you're moving through water, rather than the freedom of the open space.
Fascinating, Joy. Well, we're going to see another film clip now, and it's I Always Take the Long Way Home. Let's go.
So these have all been written and about to finish with. Well, the width of the risers are too short. He's not sure how that happened, but that's what's happened. His platforms that he's built, now the platforms that he built are skeletal. In other words, he thought that the mirror could just sit right on top of the skeletal structure. And we're going to try and get away with the 8-inch mirror, which is fairly clumsy. And actually, this piece is a lot smaller. Seems like this. But anyway, the easiest solution we could do is to cut plywood platforms, which I think will solve a lot of problems. It'll make sure that the mirror is going to be safe. It will allow us the surgeons to put a stop, to screw a stop on it, so it gives you more structure. And what we'll do when the mirror is cut, we'll cut a piece of mirror to go in front of this piece, a piece of mirror to go behind it. So that there's room for this stop here.
So it'll stay like that.
Pardon? It'll sit in that space, plus it'll have another piece of straight wood to help hold it, so I think that'll be helpful.
That film was jumping on us a bit, but actually it added to the movement a little bit more. Well, what about All the Way Home? What is the title again?
I Always Take the Fun Way Home.
Oh, The Fun Way Home.
And this was really our first full collaboration, Philip Simon and myself. And he produced the light and the sound for this. It had 3 projectors with color slides, filtered slides, and then it was on a computerized program. And he took my voice and worked with the computer to make it into interesting sounds that at one time sounds like a child, another time sounds like a machine or an older person.
Yeah.
Again, speaking to the cycles of life and the cycles of time that we all go through, and when we're in the middle of one cycle, we often forget about the previous ones or the ones that are coming. And this, again, is the image from the Montana building, and it speaks to the idea that our anticipation of a journey very often and our participation within that journey is equally, if not more important than the arrival. And in fact, that's our life, is a journey.
Yeah. But hopefully it's the fun way home. That's what
Absolutely.
it's all about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Joy, we're going to go back to your studio now. We keep moving around here. This is kind of fun. And we're going to see a couple of specific pieces that you've done and have you explain them to us. So let's do that now.
I'd like to tell you the story about this recent piece, which is entitled, "We Always Take Our Layers With Us." And it's about concept of home, travel, both in reality and psychologically, and our relationship as human beings to nature, and making a life from nature and with nature and living with. And the piece to me really is a story about traveling through life. And it has what I consider to be pieces that are archived both from human form, with the cast hands making gestures towards natural forms, towards a bird's nest that's inhabited by 3 eggs. One egg is broken, which represents the flight of that particular individual from the home onto a life of its own. You also see that there are steps. Everything is not on one level. It's a progression, regression, a combination of the two to create cycles and a wholeness. There are pieces of animal bones, which I consider to be as relics. They remind you of a life that once was, and a life that will come from the next cycle or into the next cycle. And the bits of mirror are always interesting to include in these works because they pick up random light and cause light splays and shadows around the work. The branches, obvious representations of nature, and create a landscape, a miniature landscape, and a landscape that's contained. And to me, the contained landscape invites the viewer to put themselves inside of this landscape or this allegory and story and to become part of it, to create their own story from the artifacts that are offered visually. And that's what I really hope to come from the audience. I want to give just enough information to make an intriguing visual experience and then invite the viewer to take that visual experience and make it a part of themselves. And that's the story. I'd like to show you what I consider to be a small work. This was a maquette for a piece that was created for a shopping plaza in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, that is owned by David Bermant, who is a very good art collector. And within this maquette, I was playing with the forms and what would be contained inside of the forms, which is the general vocabulary of my work in glass. It is more or less structural architectural forms containing pieces that have another message behind the surface. Chaos usually contained in structure. And this piece is 2 forms that are leaning towards each other, which is to say that they are dependent on each other for their balance, which is, to me, how we are as human beings. And inside of the forms, there are steps and ladders that traverse the distance between the 2 forms, again, talking about individual language. But along this path, there are chaotic shards of glass that actually break the surface at the top of the work, which talks about how our minds work and the inconsistency of our emotions and the freedom that we actually should give to that inconsistency. And the steps below are steps to our subconscious. And the title of this piece is Godzilla versus King Kong. And the title of the larger piece, which in its finished form was 5 feet high and 13 feet long, was entitled Slam Dancing at the Prom. Again, with the idea that we try to relate to each other, whether it's in friendly manners or violent manners, there's always the need to communicate, and communicate through both trying to subvert the chaotic aspects and to present ourselves in a more structured manner.
That was really interesting, Joy. You talked about so many different things. You spoke about dependency, chaos, freedom, the subconscious. There's so much philosophy behind your work. And do you always have an opportunity to explain? Because there's a sensory experience happening, obviously, but then there's so much thought behind them. Are you aiming to intrigue us with, help me here.
I am aiming to intrigue, and
Okay.
again, trying to make a circle of thought that's not quite closed, so that there is enough intrigue and enough familiarity through the materials and sometimes the imagery that again invites the viewer to create their own story.
Okay, so you're really a storyteller.
I think of myself that way.
Yes, yes, because you're using allegories, allusions, illusions. You're aiming for that when you're, well now, when you do a site-specific piece or a piece in your studio or a collaborative work, do you discern a difference in the creative process for yourself? Or
in a way I do, and it's always a learning experience because I'm opening up my stories to someone I'm going to be working with, not only to the viewer. When the stories are told to the viewer, you stand back and you watch it happen. Hope that it happens. With the piece at Central Connecticut, it was wonderful. The students themselves, very few of them have been to large open western spaces. But that work touched something in almost every one of those students. They could think of some building, some experience with space, nature, the built environment, that really had caused them to reflect about their life and their relationship with built form. So it doesn't need to be specific. The story needs to be specific but general. Again, it's an invitation. And working collaboratively, I open myself up, as does the artist that I'm working with, to try to draw the best we can from each other. And we share stories. And through the sharing of the stories, we create yet
a new energy,
one.
really.
Yep.
Yeah, or a new story.
Which is, it's very exciting. And each collaboration that I've done with the performance work with Michael Rush and photographer Sylvia Taccani, and then most recently at the Stanford Museum with Sylvia Taccani, who's a photographer, it's just been a wonderful experience for all of us because we have an inherent respect and admiration for each other's work, and it's an opportunity for us to get to know each other better. And through that sharing process really grow as artists and as people.
And as people, yeah. Well, it's really about experimentation too, because, and even with these other people that you've collaborated with, you're experimenting to create this new story. That's very exciting.
Well, I think of life as an experiment.
Well, this is true. This is true.
The story only ends once.
Well, perhaps. Well, you know, when I was reading some of the material, you referred to yourself as a fusion artist. Do you remember that, or what do you mean by that?
I mean that I take different materials that really almost has more to do with the idea of the materials that I work with, and try to create sometimes disparate materials. In other words, if you think of branches or pieces of bone, and then you think of computer art, it's kind of hard for your mind automatically to put those two together. But in fact, they're both now very common elements in my work. And that's a fusion between current happening with the computer world and with reminiscence of things past. So that too often I think that as people we tend to focus only on one time, one place, one element, and it limits how we can see things.
Yes. Yes.
And how we are actually each storehouses of information from our own memory and our own experience. And the more we acknowledge that, I think the more that we have to offer ourselves and others.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure you offer a lot to others as a teacher. How has teaching informed your own work? Has that experience been a major influence on your work?
It's been major at certain times. And when I don't teach for periods of time, I do miss it, because the students always have fresh questions that again come from their own experience. They may be at a point in their lives where they're not even conscious of where their questions are coming from, but they're always very fresh and very challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And without that experience with younger people, it's very easy, I think, to become too much of your own person. That opportunities are wonderful when you have a chance to work with people of all ages.
And express. Yes,
and express.
Express. Well, you use a lot of symbolism in your work, too. We talked about metaphors and allegories. And I noticed in your studio, and there are some here, triangles, which can be a religious symbol. Does spirituality inform your work? And if it does, can you talk about that?
I think the spirituality is almost subconscious. The pyramid form is really the simplest and the strongest of all the architectural shapes. So it's a natural form to be using, to be building work with a plainer material such as glass. And it also gives you a shape that is easily filled with the broken glass and gives you the intrigue of both, if you will, the deep end and the shallow end.
Yes.
Unlike
yes.
pieces that are more angular, which are more consistent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, what about titles for your work? How do you come up with these titles like King Kong slam dancing at the prom? I mean, where do they come from?
Well, they come from my own experience as well as the idea. Sometimes the work is almost too serious, and I think it takes away from the pleasure and playfulness that
your intent.
Of the intent. So that sometimes sort of throwing a title in from left field can bring a smile to people and therefore make them feel more comfortable with the work.
And try to get into it more.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happened to me, because when you said the title, I thought, well, let me try to read that story, which is, it's fun. I mean, it's fun, and I think it's very important because your work is serious when you think about shattered glass. Initially, it's a very serious experience. So to add humor to it, I think that's terrific, terrific. Joy, you've applied for and received a lot of grants from different arts organizations. That's a lot of work, I understand that. Would you encourage, or do you encourage young artists to do this in order to be able to express themselves in their work?
I think that grant writing and having your work exposed to different people in different places is very important to start with, and that young artists should not feel hesitant in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They should also not feel badly about rejection, because rejection is a big part of being an artist. And being a successful artist certainly has to do with how well you can ride that rejection and go on to the next place. And as time goes on as a young artist, you become more focused about where your work and your ideas are most appropriate. But I think as a young artist, if you have the energy, you should be out there exploring all different corners.
Whatever. We're getting out of time here, and I have a lot of other questions, but tell me about Through the Glass Ceiling.
Through the Glass Ceiling? I was commissioned by the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession to design an award for them. And this was done through a friend who is involved with the American Bar Association, unbeknownst to me. And as professional women, there has been a term, breaking through the glass ceiling, which I think most of us are familiar with. And so since my work has to do with the transparency of glass and also with the shattered glass, I seem to be the natural person to do that.
Well, Joy, where do you think your work is going?
Well,
hard question?
Hard question.
Yeah.
But come on Sunday the 12th of June and see what Sylvia and I come up with at the Stanford Museum.
What's happening?
And also look forward to projects about time and the coming millennium.
Okay, yes, that's a whole nother thing. I think we're going to have to do a whole nother program. Projects for a new millennium, that's the next subject. Joy, thank you for being with us on Art Talk today. It's been a pleasure for me. And thank you for joining us for this week's Art Talk. I hope you've enjoyed visiting with Joy in many of her studios. It's been a remarkable and sensory experience in many ways, adding to our learning about different ways of seeing and experiencing light and space and time. Until next time, I'm Patricia Shippee.